I'm just going to give everyone a minute to join our session here, and then we'll jump right in and get started. Fantastic. I see a lot of familiar names. It's great to have you all back here again today. So welcome everyone to our fall edition of What's Happening in PWS Research. Today's presentation will be given by Dr. Theresa Strong, FPWR's own Director of Research Programs. As always, we welcome your questions. Please do ask questions. To do so, just use the question function in your Zoom control panel to submit those questions into our Q&A, which we will answer at the end of today's presentation. So I like to keep it short and sweet. Theresa, I'm going to hand it over to you so we can hear what's happening in research.
All right. Thank you, Susan. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides so we can get started. So thank you all. I don't know what I did there. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. I wanted to tell you a little bit about what's been going on in PWS research, and I'll focus mainly on like an overview of some of the work that was presented at the conference this summer, and also some of the work that's come out of the Global Registry. And then we'll pivot to the new grants that we have awarded this fall and talk about the importance of those grants. And then, as Susan said, hope to have a lot of questions and we can discuss those. So first, we held a joint conference with IPSO and the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association this past summer, and I just wanted to give you some highlights of the scientific part of that session. So one of the wonderful things about getting together face to face for a scientific meeting is it allows us to break off into smaller groups that are, working together on specific projects. And one of those groups is the PWS Clinical Investigation Collaborative. This is a collaboration of our PWS clinicians, some of them endocrinologists, geneticists, psychiatrists, all working together to improve the care of individuals with PWS. So at the current time, we have about 30 sites across the US and Canada that are participating in this collaboration, and we're growing all the time. It's just been fantastic to be able to get together. We have one virtual meeting and one in-person meeting each year, and the day before the scientific conference, our CLIC investigators were able to get together and have a meeting and talk about the database that they're putting together, some of the pressing issues in clinical care in PWS. The mission of this group is to improve the quality of clinical research and medical care for people with PWS across the lifespan through this collaborative initiative and advancing research that supports evidence-based care. So the idea is that every patient that comes to see them, they gain and share knowledge from so that every person with PWS can receive the best care. So as part of that, the CLIC planned 4 clinical workshops. So 4 issues that they felt were really important for this group to address. And they opened this up to other participants in the scientific meeting. So members from IPSO, from all over joined in these 4 workshops. So they're listed here. One was asking a question that we've heard a lot from parents as well. So we hear a lot about the GLP agonists. This is the Ozempic and tirzepatide, and are these good in PWS for our kids and young adults with PWS or not? A second area was looking at behavior and mental health concerns, and particularly how to manage these and how to tease out what is a medical problem from what is a potentially mental health problem or behavioral problem. A group looked at health equity in clinical research and care, and they were looking, since it was an international conference, they were looking at health equity across countries, but also within countries. What are the inequities in access and care within a country and across countries? And finally, a topic that I know many of you are interested in, I'm interested in as well as my son starts to reach middle adulthood, aging in PWS. How do we optimize care for individuals across the lifespan? And these workshops were held with the support of FPWR and also Friends of IPSO. And they were a great exchange of ideas and prioritization of, things that these clinical healthcare professionals should be looking at to advance these areas. And that's always great. It's always great to get together and exchange ideas, but it's also important to follow up on those ideas. And everybody's so busy that sometimes it's hard to follow up on those ideas, but I'm really pleased to say there's been some fantastic follow-up. So, for example, a paper will come out very soon. It's been accepted, looking at the recommendations for evidence, real-world evidence of the safety and efficacy of GLP-1 agonists in PWS. So this is acknowledging that there are many individuals who are receiving GLP-1 agonists, and that the clinical community needs to pull data from that and better understand what the PWS specific complications might be, what the benefit might be. Regarding the mental health and behavior component, Doctors Singh and Holland, who led that session, are developing an educational module so that healthcare providers who don't see PWS every day can have insight into these issues of behavior and mental health, and how to manage those in the setting of a potential health concern, other health concern. The Health Equity and PWS group is led by Theresa Strong and the Colors of Hope members, and they are working across the organization, so FPWR, PWSA, and IPSO, to develop a working group that can address some of the health equity issues. And finally, the Aging in PWS also has follow-up, looking at some of the cognition and other issues that are of concern for aging individuals with PWS. So a lot of great follow-up, and I think that momentum will continue, which is fantastic. We also had some amazing keynote talks, and I think my reason for bringing this up is that one thing I heard over and over again about this conference was the quality of the science that was being presented there. And I will say to all of you as supporters of FPWR, it was notable that the majority of work was supported by FPWR, and each of the investigators who gave a keynote address has been supported in part by FPWR funds. So I think it just really speaks to the quality of investigators that we've been able to bring to the field. Others, like Dr. Holland, has been in the field since the pretty much the beginning. So, but I think it's a great combination to support those investigators who are, committed to PWS over the long term and bring in some fresh new investigators as well. So we had Dr. Jeffrey Friedman, who's really an icon in the field. He is the person who discovered leptin, which is the hormone that regulates body weight. And he has some FPWR funding looking in a mouse model of PWS at the specifics of the hypothalamus. But he gave a beautiful overview of what is known about weight regulation, about therapies for controlling weight, and how PWS fits into the picture. Dr. Holland talked about a downloadable book that's available on the IPSO website that came out of the last IPSO meeting. There was a workshop on improving mental health and managing challenging behavior in PWS. It's a great compilation of expert opinions on that, and it's freely available for download, so I would encourage you to download that. Marnie Blewett is looking at gene therapy for PWS, and she gave a fantastic overview of those possibilities. And Dr. Laura Hulson talked about some of the brain imaging that is being done in PWS and also some of the neuromodulation. So she is doing a study on transcranial magnetic stimulation as trying to apply that to hyperphagia in PWS. So lots of great keynotes. And there were also just lots of great science that was presented. So it was a big meeting, about 400 attended. One really nice thing to see was, a critical mass of young investigators. Dr. Scheiman suggested that we give young investigator awards, and those were very well received and acknowledge some of the great work that these young investigators are doing. And they are really the future of PWS research. So it's great to see them attending this meeting and presenting the great work that they're doing. So I'll switch gears. I'm going to jump around a little bit. The scientific meeting was just a reminder of the breadth and depth of PWS research that is going on. And part of what is fueling that is the Global PWS Registry. So we have reached 10 years of the Global PWS Registry right now. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of the great things that have come out of that. I think when FPWR started the Global PWS Registry, we knew it would be an important tool for supporting both the understanding of PWS and potentially clinical trials. I'll speak for myself. I didn't really understand like what a fantastic impact and how many ways we could use it to support the advancement of new therapies for PWS. One of the strengths of the registry is a strong governance and strong input from many members of the community. So in addition to myself as an investigator on the registry, Dr. Jennifer Miller and Sean McCandless are both investigators on the registry and oversee the activities that we do there. We are on the NORD platform, the National Organizations for Rare Disorders. They have I think about 30 different rare disease registries now. And so they're really helpful as far as adding an extra layer of expertise, data analysis, data support, and also, just keeping us honest as far as making sure everybody who has access to the registry has all of their training in place, that everything is we've checked all the boxes as far as, having appropriate security and whatnot. We are also overseen by North Star Review Board, which provides ethical oversight. And finally, we have a Global PWS Advisory Board that has several members, parent representatives, clinicians, additional clinicians, representatives from PWS advocacy groups, so PWSA and IPSO currently, and an industry representative who is not working in the field of PWS, but who can advise us on interacting with industry. And they review everything that we do and make sure that the work that we do is in the best interests of the participants. So to everyone who has provided data and spent time completing the surveys, we really appreciate you putting your trust in us. And I'm just really excited by the number of things that we've been able to do with that. So we've been able to learn much more about the scope of PWS symptoms towards the goal of optimizing care, build knowledge that informs therapeutic development. So we pull a lot of data to share with pharmaceutical companies as they're building their protocols for PWS clinical trials, and also to have quantitative data that supports the anecdotal or storytelling that our community is so great at doing, sharing the stories of PWS and the unmet needs of their family with regulators, with policymakers. The global registry can provide quantitative data that supports that. So individual stories are incredibly powerful. And then having the data behind it to say, well, this is a problem for 80% or 90% or almost 100% of our families just complements that nicely. So we've recruited through the registry for more than 25 different trials and studies. We've provided data that has informed the development of 20 different clinical trial protocols. And we've also used the registry to develop outcome measures, these assessments that are used in clinical trials, all of which are critical to being able to move PWS trials forward. So these are some of the publications that have come out of the registry. And I think they, again, give you a real understanding of how many ways we've been able to use the registry. So everything from validation of the PWS anxiousness and distress questionnaire to answering questions that clinicians have come to us with. So Dr. Sani Roy noticed that individuals, babies with PWS who had G tubes at her institution seemed to have a lot more complication than those who had NG tubes. So we put a survey in there. Thank you everyone who answered the survey on feeding tubes. And she found that what she saw at her institution was true in the wider community, that the G tubes um, tend to be associated with much higher complication rates. So sometimes they're necessary and that's fine, but in a case where you could do either G tube or NG tube, an NG tube seems like the safer option. So having that bit of information out in the medical literature means anytime someone at, a smaller hospital that doesn't deal with very many babies with PWS, if they want to know what to do, they can go look this up and know to defer to an NG tube whenever possible. So my son is older now, but we contributed data to that, and I kind of look at it as a way of giving back for new families that are coming into our space. As I mentioned, the registry has been pivotal in allowing the development of outcome assessments for clinical trials. So we've used it to better understand how the HQCT, which is the main measure of hyperphagia that's used across clinical trials, how that behaves in the untreated PWS population, as well as in typically developing individuals. So what's the separation in scores between, a typical child and someone with PWS across age groups? It's been used in collaboration with the Vanderbilt group, so Elizabeth Dykens and Elizabeth Roof, who have developed the food safe zone, which measures how parents restrict food access for their individual with PWS, and also for the PWS profile, which is a profile of many of the behavioral PWS unique behaviors that we see. And so in all of those cases, the registry was really important. So everybody who contributed data and did these surveys within the registry has really helped advance clinical trials. The other thing that has come out of the registry that we've talked about a fair bit is the Path for PWS study, which has now been wrapped up. This was a prospective natural history study where we were asking of kids age 5 and up, what sends our kids to the emergency room or to urgent care? What are those serious medical events that happen? We also use that to better understand the PWS associated behaviors and how those change over time. Parents reported on any serious medical events that occurred, what prescription medications their child was taking, height and weight changes, and behavioral assessments every 6 months over 4 to 5 years. So we have a wealth of data from that, which we are analyzing and which we are preparing manuscripts and publications from. So one of the main things that we did was look at the serious medical events that occurred across all of the participants. And there were more than 1,800 serious medical events over the time of PATH, and then group them together and see, what things, again, what categories of things are sending our kids to acute care or the hospital. And mental health and behavioral concerns, extreme behaviors really led the way, which is, I think, not too surprising to many of us, but it is nice to better understand exactly what's going on in those situations. And GI issues were a close second. So followed by orthopedic issues, respiratory problems, and then neurology, things like seizures, was also fairly prominent as far as sending individuals to the hospital. Just a couple of slides to look a little bit more deeply into those. With respect to the GI serious medical events, it was really sort of everything. So a lot of different things were going on in our kids with PWS. Constipation we know is very common in PWS, but this is constipation where the child or adult ends up in the hospital because, it's really very serious. We also saw bleeds, infection, vomiting, just general impactions and things. So lots of different GI events. And I think this is something that we all kind of get used to, and we probably need to be making sure that we're paying enough attention to how to prevent these issues. We also saw a lot of orthopedic problems, and I'll just point out a couple of things. First, with respect to fractures and bone breaks, that was about 2 times what you see in the general population. And I think that's not surprising and goes along with the bone health issues that we see in PWS. But it's important to know that the poor bone health is probably leads to this higher rate of having fractures and broken bones. We also saw some dislocations that were really much more frequent than you see in the general population. For example, knee dislocations are very much more common in our population compared to the general population. And because we had many kids that were in sort of that adolescent age range, we were able to record the procedures and complications for 58 different scoliosis-related surgeries. And we'll be writing that up as a manuscript because one of the things we found that there was a really high rate of complications. So again, much higher than the general population. And that's not to say that scoliosis surgery shouldn't be done and can't be very successful. But I think what it says is that the surgeon needs to understand that the PWS population, if it's someone who does not do a lot of surgery on individuals with PWS, is just more likely to have some complications. So looking ahead, if you are more interested in things that came out of the global registry, we have a nice blog about the top 10 learnings from the registry. During the coming months, we're prepping several papers, and we will be presenting just on that at a webinar about the serious medical events, the changes in behavior, the scoliosis surgeries and complications, and also the use of psychiatric medication, which is very high in our population. So all that sets up the announcement that we will have a new version of the Global PWS Registry. The content of the registry is mostly staying the same, but it's moving to a new platform on the NORD platform. So NORD is upgrading their platform, which will allow, if you've ever tried to do the Global Registry on your phone, it's not particularly mobile friendly, so it will update that, so that's much better. It will allow us to translate the global registry into first Spanish and French. And you can't really be a global registry if you don't have multiple languages. So we're really excited about that. If you're already in the global registry, your existing record will be moved over to the new registry. So, we don't expect any data to be lost. We'll make sure it's all there before we close down the initial registry. And it will still have some of the features that I think are great. Like, once you complete a survey, you'll be able to see the aggregated data, so you'll know how your child compares to other. The other thing that we're going to launch with the new registry that I'm very excited about is the VICAD Experience module. So VICAD, as most of you know, is the new drug from Soleno that was approved, the first drug approved to treat hyperphagia in PWS. And as it moves out of the clinical trial and into the broader PWS population, there's a lot of questions. What level of improvement can I expect? How long will it take to see a change? Who's benefiting the most and who's at risk? Because we know that the VICAT is associated with some risk of side effects. Some people do great on it and have no side effects at all, while others have significant side effects. So if we can better understand who's going to do well and who is at highest risk for these complications, it will help guide the entire field so that we can use the drug optimally. So we're really hoping that all of our families who are using VICAT will go in, complete these surveys. They're fairly comprehensive, everything from, how long did it take you to get the drug once your doctor prescribed it, to what changes are you seeing and how long did it take you to see them. So that should be out in by mid-December. So it's like a Christmas present. So if you need a little time to get away from your family over Christmas, you can lock yourself in a room and I'm sure you have other fun things to do, but maybe you can fit that into your schedule as well. Okay, and I'll mention, as I always do, the clinical trials that are ongoing. I know our community, myself included, were surprised and disappointed at the Acadia result, finding that carbetocin did not seem to improve, at least in the setting of the clinical trial with the measures that we have. It did not seem to improve hyperphagia or some of the other behaviors that we were or they were looking at. But there are other clinical trials ongoing. There's a lot of interest from other biotechs. So please keep your eye on our clinical trial webpage for new opportunities and existing opportunities for clinical trials. I'll mention too, these are all trials of drugs. We also see a lot of activity in the devices. I mentioned Laura Hulson is doing a transcranial magnetic stimulation protocol in a pilot study in individuals with PWS. There are groups looking at deep brain stimulation as a possibility for reducing hyperphagia. Deepan Singh has a study using bright light therapy to help with daytime sleepiness and kind of resetting the circadian rhythm, which we know is kind of a mess in PWS. And FPWR is sponsoring a study of vagus nerve stimulation that is almost fully enrolled. So this is a study to look at whether wearing a vagus nerve stimulator, which stimulates the vagus nerve through the left ear, can reduce temper outbursts and is safe in individuals with PWS. And we hope to enroll a total of 102 individuals. These individuals have to wear the device for a total of 4 hours a day. And we're looking at whether this reduces the occurrence or intensity or the length of time that individuals with PWS have temper outbursts. We know temper outbursts can be a real concern for many individuals with PWS. We see that in the PATH study where extreme aggression and temper outbursts is among the most common things where people end up in the hospital because they hurt themselves, they hurt others. It's just a really difficult thing to manage. So we're hopeful that this study will show us whether VNS can be helpful for that.
I saw that I shocked you just a second,
Yeah,
but
I
I
know.
couldn't resist popping in because you're talking about temper outbursts and perhaps describing some of the more aggressive outbursts that we consider when we're thinking of temper outbursts, but temper outbursts can actually define many different behaviors for people who perhaps don't have those aggressive outbursts. What might they be seeing in order to be eligible for this study?
Yeah, that's a great point, Susan. We often think about the most extreme cases, but temper outbursts look different, as we know, in different individuals. So for some people, it is that kind of yelling or aggressive behavior. For many others, it's more of a shutting down, not being able to participate. So we have a set of questions that we're happy to review with you if you contact Lisa. But it's things like, is the behavior or the upsetness inappropriate based on the person's age? Is it getting out of their control? Is it keeping the person from participating in regular activities? So again, sometimes it's yelling, sometimes it's just shutting down and not being able to move on. And those are all problematic behaviors that are around this, within the definition that we're considering here. So if those kinds of behaviors are also problematic for you, and you'd like to see a decrease in those behaviors, please talk to Lisa Mattisvec. You can send her an email. She's extremely responsive, and we'll see if your loved one with PWS is a good fit for this study. Okay, so now we'll move on to the new grants. As a reminder, the FPWR grant program covers all aspects. So this is our program where we just ask for everybody's best idea. And sometimes it's very basic science, sometimes it's clinical trials, and sometimes it's clinical care using existing drugs and trying to optimize the use. So it's really, compilation of many different kinds of research. So we have 7 different awards that we are awarding this fall, and they're listed here. We have several basic science, and then also a few that are looking at new potential therapeutic targets for PWS. So I'll just go through those and then we'll take questions. The first is a very basic science study looking at leveraging the large data sets that now exist. And in this case, leveraging data sets of brain imaging and 3D structure of DNA, which are 2 different things, obviously, but both are related to expression of genes in the PWS region. So Dr. Williams, it looks at large databases, and he'll be looking at how DNA variants in the PWS genes in typically developing individuals influences brain development. And that's important for understanding how the PWS genes impact brain development. He'll also be looking at some of the molecular 3-dimensional databases of DNA structure. We know that DNA structure, like its 3D configuration, is very important in determining what genes will be expressed. So if our gene therapy is based on activating or turning a silent gene into an active gene, chances are it's got a lot to do with the 3D configuration. So he is looking at that as well, and there's large data sets of studies in different tissues looking at 3-dimensional arrangement of DNA. So he's going to be searching for links between these PWS genes and brain structure, and also between gene regulation in the PWS region and 3-dimensional structure. We're excited about this study because it leverages some new tools and data sets that have not been queried with respect to PWS. It's an opportunity to identify new genetic features that are relevant to the PWS symptoms, and it supports other studies. So this data and the analysis of this data will help anyone who, for example, is trying to develop a gene therapy for PWS. The long-term goal is to develop a better understanding of the regulation of the PWS genes and their links to brain development, and to use that information to guide future research. A second very basic science study is from Dr. Doge at Columbia University. She's been looking at the SNORD genes, which are these critical genes in the PWS region. And her question is, what do these normally do? Because they're lost or inactivated in PWS, but it's important to understand, like, what do they do in the first place so we can better understand what happens when they're lost. So she'll be using some advanced technology to measure expression of these SNORDs and also almost 500 other genes at the same time in tissue sections of human brain, just to get a sense of co-expression patterns that may provide insights into what these SNORD RNAs are doing. So we're excited about this project because it's using cutting-edge technology, and it is looking down to the cellular level, so neuron by neuron, of the PWS genes. And we think it will improve our understanding of the normal activities of these snords, which are specific to primates. So we can't look at this in mouse models or rat models because they're not present. These are primate-specific SNO-RNAs, so they probably have a really important role in brain development and function. The long-term goal is to define the specific cell types and locations within the hypothalamus and the cerebellum that express these critical SNORD genes and understand what they do so that we can understand what happens when they're lost. Another study comes from Dr. Reiter, and this one really starts in basic science, but moves over towards therapeutic development. So Dr. Reiter, many of you know, he's been studying the stem cells that are derived from baby teeth. So thank you, everyone who has sent him baby teeth from their child with PWS when those have fallen out. He has found that the mitochondria, which you'll remember is the powerhouse of the cell, seem to be mislocalized. So they're not sitting in the right place in some individuals with PWS, particularly those who have a UPD and autism. And that suggests that that may be a therapeutic avenue. So he's going to be using some new tools that allow you to look at the function of mitochondria in living cells to analyze that further. And then he'll use that information to look at some drugs that are known to impact mitochondrial function and see if there is a correction of those deficits. So we're excited about this project because it we see more of a focus on mitochondria in other areas of neurodevelopmental disorders as well as mental health disorders, that there may be a mitochondrial kind of signature of these issues. And there's increasing pharmaceutical interest in using drugs that impact the mitochondria, maybe to correct some of these differences. And he'll be using some of the newer tools to look at this problem and see what can be rescued. So a positive rescue data of mitochondrial function would lay the rationale for testing these drugs in individuals with PWS. Another study along these lines, really determining whether a target is worth pursuing in a human clinical trial, is coming from Dr. Azevedo. She has been looking at the acetylcholine system. Acetylcholine is an important neurotransmitter. It impacts, among other things, cognition, social behaviors, metabolism. And she has found that there is reduced cholinergic signaling in a mouse model of PWS. She and others have also found this in some tissue from individuals with PWS, so there seems to be some consistency in these findings. And, a really attractive thing is there are FDA-approved drugs for increasing acetylcholine levels. So we really want to, before those drugs are not perfect, though, you don't want to just jump into testing them without a strong scientific rationale. And that's what this study is meant to do. So it will test whether these drugs, in combination with a choline-rich diet in a mouse model of PWS, will improve eating behaviors, learning, and social interaction. So we're excited about this study because it applies new tools to measure acetylcholine levels in live PWS mice. It will test new drugs, and it has the potential to address multiple symptoms in PWS. And as I said, a successful completion of this project, if this project shows promise, it'll lay the foundation for testing these drugs in people with PWS. Another potential therapeutic for PWS that, again, we would want to better understand before doing clinical studies, but which looks quite promising, is BDNF. This is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's kind of a growth factor for neurons. And there's evidence that BDNF is low in PWS, and that is consistent with the symptoms. So there are other disorders that have low BDNF, and that's associated with cognitive deficits, with some metabolic deficits, sort of a proneness to being overweight. previous studies by another investigator, Dr. Cow, have shown if you do gene therapy into the hypothalamus of a PWS mouse and deliver BDNF, that it improves symptoms. But doing gene therapy is, a significant thing to do. As an alternative, what Dr. Whitcomb at the University of Bristol is going to try is testing whether a new ultrasound method can cause the hypothalamus itself to release more BDNF, so endogenous or its own BDNF. So this is a small pilot study just to take some normal rats and do this ultrasound and then measure the BDNF that is being secreted. If this study is successful, then Dr. Whitcomb will move it to a more PWS specific model, and we could consider whether this is something that could be tried in individuals with PWS. So it's very attractive because, this is potentially a relatively non-invasive and affordable approach to stimulate BDNF secretion, first in rats and then maybe one day in humans with PWS. Moving now to more therapeutic development, I mentioned Dr. Blewett at the beginning. She gave a keynote talk at the conference in Arizona. She's been working for some years on approaches to unsilencing or activating gene expression from the mom's chromosome 15. So every person with PWS has the mom's chromosome 15 present, but not active. And she is looking at this protein SMID-D1, whose normal job it is to silence expression on the maternal allele. And what she's looking at, or the maternal chromosome, what she's looking at is whether if she inhibits SMID-D1, those genes become active. And she's been able to show that one of the genes, MAGEL2, is activated. Now she's going to move to a mouse model that has all of the PWS genes inactivated to see if they can all turn on at the same time, and whether turning those things on improves the symptoms of PWS in this mouse model. So we're interested in this study because there's promising data in the MAGEL2 PWS mouse. Now we'll advance to a more complicated mouse system where there's many genes that are affected, including those snore genes. And this approach, and it will evaluate the potential of this specific approach to rescue expression of all the PWS genes. So long term, it's really evaluating whether SMID-D1 inhibition is a viable route for activating PWS genes and recovering some of the function of those genes. And again, we like the gene therapy approach because it has the potential to be kind of a one fell swoop approach to restoring all of the functions in the PWS region. Finally, Dr. Dan Driscoll, who many of you know or know of, will be using an artificial intelligence program to determine nutritional phases in PWS. So Dr. Driscoll has led, along with Dr. Miller, an effort to define 6 different nutritional phases of PWS. And when Dr. Driscoll and Miller do it together, they're in agreement almost all the time, but it's not clear that everybody, all the clinicians around the globe, would be able to apply the same criteria in the same way. So in order to make this more accessible to all PWS clinicians, he's using data that he and others have developed, including, survey data, metabolic data on individuals with PWS, to develop a program to help classify people into the nutritional phases. So this project will train an AI program to determine the nutritional phase based on hormonal, metabolic, other clinical features. And we're excited about this project because obviously it's a very experienced team. They have a lot of clinical data. It's an opportunity to understand maybe why a person moves from phase 2B into phase 3, which is where hyperphagia occurs. And it's an important thing for potentially stratifying clinical trials, for measuring. One of the things I think that's of interest with VICAT is, can it prevent the onset of more severe hyperphagia? Well, having a clear nutritional phase delineation will help studies like that. So it's really a tool that will be used both for clinical care and also, I think, in clinical trials potentially. So I think that is all of our grants that we're funding this fall. We do have some other things in the work, but those are the grants that came through in this grant cycle. Um, Looking ahead, as I mentioned, we're really excited about the VICAT module in the global registry and hope that there'll be great participation so that we can learn things quickly about how VICAT works and some of the, side effects and benefits and all of that. So learning how to apply that in the best way possible. We'll continue to see the PWS click growing. It's getting to be a stronger and stronger network, which is just fabulous. There'll be additional clinical trial opportunities. There already are clinical trial opportunities, so please stay aware of those. And I think, into 2026, we're going to see a lot of movement in the genetic therapy areas. We continue to invest in a number of different clinical trial, a number of different experimental studies. Soleno's Therapeutics has said that they're also going to be investing in gene therapy. So I think there's a lot of momentum in that. And we'll be sharing results from the Path for PWS study, and also, which I didn't get to talk to about today, which is one of my favorite things, though, is looking at the entire genome of individuals with PWS to see if that can help inform, the spectrum of disease and potential therapies. So I'll just again mention with respect to the gene therapies, here are some of the projects that we are currently funding, and it's a lot of information. I apologize, but just to say, we're looking at many different techniques, and we're also supporting studies that look at how, once you have a technique that you think works, how are you going to get that into the brain, and probably into the hypothalamus is likely to be key. And so we're supporting work on that in parallel. So once we get sort of settle on the right technique, hopefully there'll be the right delivery mechanism to accomplish that. And I didn't get to mention it, but I couldn't resist the pretty pictures. There's a lot of work going on with stem cells. Thank you, everyone who has contributed to the biorepository or to Dr. Ryder's baby teeth project. Those things have allowed us to make a lot of stem cells, which have been critical in many of the experiments that have been done by these scientists understanding PWS. And they're growing these stem cells in 2 dimensions. They're growing them in 3 dimensionals to see how the cells communicate. Those are organoids, so what's called brain in a dish. And now Emory University is making assembloids, where they're taking different stem cells that have been made into different parts of the hypothalamus and trying to bring them together to see how parts of the hypothalamus communicate with each other. So there's a lot of really cool work that's going on there. So I will stop there, and thank you for your attention. Thank you for your support. We really could not do any of this without the generous work of people who raise funds for us, who donate to FPWR, and we appreciate your trust in us in helping to use those funds to move PWS research forward. So Susan, if we can take some questions, that would be great.
Great. So just as a reminder for anyone who would like to ask a question of Dr. Strong, you're welcome to submit them through the Q&A panel of your Zoom module. So we do have most of the questions, Theresa, are really around that genetic therapy. And so maybe you could give, I feel like you did do a little bit of a summary, but where are we in the big scheme of things, in the landscape of genetic therapy? Where are we at today, and how far is that from humans?
Well, it's I'm going to stop sharing because I'm apparently can't work slides. Sorry. Um, uh, It's difficult to say exactly how far we are from humans. So I think we're at the point now where there are several different approaches being developed in parallel. So I talked about Dr. Blewett and her work on SMID-D1, and she is developing enzymatic inhibitors of SMID-D1, which is a very well-known druggable way to control a protein. So if her studies prove promising in the PWS mice, and she gets a good inhibitor that has good properties, like drug properties, then that could move forward. Dr. Zhang at Yale University has been looking at drugs that impact gene expression in the PWS region. So those are oral drugs, so those could move forward relatively quickly. But they're not as specific as, for example, CRISPR. CRISPR is really specific. Dr. Gershbach, who we've supported over the last few years, and who is just, a guru in the CRISPR space, has had some really promising studies using CRISPR technology to do gene activation. But sticking CRISPR into the brain is, will be the trick there. So I think it depends on which of the technologies looks the most promising, and then what hurdles that have. So if it's a drug, it's likely to go faster into humans. If it's a CRISPR technology, CRISPR technology is advancing a lot. We hear the story of KJ being cured, but that is CRISPR technology to the liver, which is relatively easy compared to getting CRISPR into specific parts of the brain. So that is a non-answer to your question of how many years or whatever, but it really is going to depend on what looks the most promising, as well as other advances in the gene therapy field, because we will piggyback on whatever else comes out of the general gene therapy field. And there are lots of people looking at how to get genes into the brain, because all of these neurodevelopmental disorders are looking at, this kind of therapy.
So we talk about gene therapy a lot because it's exciting, it's transformative, but there's still so many questions that it's hard to give, as you said, like a non-answer to the question. You mentioned the brain. How are we actually going to get the gene therapy into the brain? Are we talking injections? What do you imagine this is going to be for the person with PWS?
Well, there's lots of different approaches, viral approaches. So, adeno-associated virus is one of the viruses that's commonly used to deliver genes to the brain. You may have heard of the Huntington's disease story that was in the news about a gene therapy reducing the symptoms of Huntington's disease. I believe that was an AAV, or adeno-associated virus. So viral vectors are a possibility, but viral vectors have their problems, as you might imagine. They can elicit an immune response, for example. So we're actually supporting Dr. Janos Zimpleni, who is looking at milk exosomes. So these are like lipid layers that you can derive from milk, and you can pack it with genes, and he's trying to make those where they specifically go to the hypothalamus. And he's had some success in the PWS mouse. So that is an injection into the bloodstream, and then it goes to the hypothalamus. So that's a potential approach. And, it's early days with that, but they're making fast progress. So again, if we get the CRISPR technology kind of optimized, and at the same time, this delivery technology, potentially a non-viral approach, gets optimized, then you can bring those two together and use that. So lots of different questions with respect to delivery of the genes, as well as the optimal way to activate gene expression. But if you look now compared to 5 or 7 years ago, nothing was going on. And now we have all of these things going on in parallel. And having them go on in parallel really cuts the time to eventually the clinic.
Mhm. I'm sure that there's many challenges in advancing a genetic therapy for Prader-Willi, but what do you think is the biggest challenge we face in getting a genetic therapy across the finish line for PWS?
Um, I think that the the actual technology of, making the virus or making the milk exosome, and then demonstrating, it's an expensive approach, right? And so that's why it's kind of nice to have Soleno taking an interest. I mean, we do a lot here at FPWR, but we do not have the funds to bring a gene therapy all the way into the clinic. The safety studies that would need to go ahead of that are several $1 million. The making a virus, which is what I used to do when I was at UAB, making a virus that is good enough to be injected into someone's brain takes a lot of effort and a lot of money. So it's likely something that would be outside of the scope of what FPWR could fund. So I think that those final steps before going into the clinic are very expensive and very time consuming, or not very time consuming. I mean, they can be done on a sort of 2-year timeline, but it is a pretty big expense. So that's what I would say is the biggest thing.
Mhm. Earlier in the presentation, you were talking about registry data and the orthopedic complications that we were seeing, a lot of fractures and breaks due to bone health. Do we have any evidence? Does growth hormone help with bone health? Are there other things that parents could be doing that might help with bone health?
Yeah, that's a great question. Growth hormone does help. I think making sure that vitamin D levels are fine and, diet is good, all of those things are helpful. I think one thing we haven't looked at that I think would be nice to look at, and I say this as someone who appreciates the benefits of some SSRIs, but they can affect bone health as well. So I think, we do have data on who in the registry is taking SSRIs, and we can compare that to who's having more fractures. And I think that would be worth looking at. The other thing I think that is worth looking at in this sense, that we have some data on, is there are some DNA variants, so outside of the PWS region, that make you more susceptible to poor bone health. And how is that playing into it? And can we identify those people who have the highest risk early on? And there are other drugs that you wouldn't give just anybody, but that can strengthen bones. For people who have osteoporosis, some of those drugs, they require, you wouldn't just give them to anyone because they're big injections or infusions. But for some individuals, it may make a lot of sense.
Mhm. You mentioned a working group that came together to discuss aging concerns that are specific to PWS. What challenges are we seeing that perhaps brought them to come together to discuss?
Yeah, I think some of it is just that in the past, a lot of individuals with PWS did not make it to an older age. And so there's very little knowledge about, like, does a person with PWS age the same way as a typical individual? And it seems just anecdotally among people in the group that mobility issues become a bigger problem earlier. And you can see that because if you're breaking your bones and if you are more prone to having dislocations, that's going to affect your mobility. And also if you're more prone to being overweight. So those kinds of issues. And then there's the question of cognitive decline. We know in some neurodevelopmental disorders that there is an accelerated cognitive decline. There's been some hint of that in PWS, that the PWS brain is maybe aging more quickly, but I don't think the data is definitive on that. And I think we want to get a good answer on that. So those are just two of the things that have come up in those discussions. And there are plans to look at cognition and testing over time in older adults, just to get a sense of whether that's similar to typical or whether there are some differences that maybe would benefit from some interventions.
Mhm. There was a really nice aging presentation at the United in Hope conference in Arizona. And as I watched that session, one of the things that I took away was we all face this as we get older, but this negative circle, essentially, you get older, you gain weight, you become
Go
less
down.
active. And she was really stressing how important it is, especially for people with PWS, to stay active, because if they don't, they're really going to gain the weight, and that leads to all the complications that come with it. So she was a huge proponent of adults staying on growth hormone or starting growth hormone if they weren't on it and staying active. And she also mentioned just working with your physician team early on to be watching for things like type 2 diabetes, just very, very early because it happens earlier. Whereas you or I might be starting to look for some of these things in our 40s or 50s. People with PWS are starting to experience them earlier. So I thought it was a great session, and I just mention it for anyone who wants to watch it. It's on FPWR's blog if you want to see it for yourself.
And I'll just say that's Dr. Laura DeGraff, and she and her team have done, the bulk of the work in, beginning to characterize some of these age-related changes. So they're a fantastic group I would listen to her. Yes.
Yeah, it was great. And they really talked about what their clinic is doing in the Netherlands, which I think it's an amazing concept what she has done. We don't have anything similar to that in the US, but I think a savvy parent can find their group of experts to help with some of these issues. As always, we have ran out of time before we've gotten through all of our questions, but there's one more that I thought was so vitally important, which was, we're talking about the cost of research and the community really funding it and not being able to fund some of these larger safety studies. What's the NIH involvement with the PWS research landscape? Are they contributing? Are they supporting research?
Well, I mean, they are. I think it is a huge challenge that funding has been extraordinarily delayed, sporadic, uncertain. I think it's doing some real damage to the overall biomedical research enterprise in the US, and that includes PWS. So the NIH they are supporting some of these gene therapies, and in particular, Dr. Yonghui Zhang, who is developing Angelman gene therapy as well as PWS gene therapy, has a big grant from the NIH on delivery methods for that. So, yes, and many of our researchers who start with PWS, FPWR funding go on to get NIH funding. But these are very uncertain times, and I think that is. I hope that it recovers soon because we're beginning to lose momentum, and I think it has the potential to do some real damage in the future. So anyone who is prone to advocacy, this is it's important to our economy and our standing in the world, and B, it's vital to our children to have a strong NIH and strong funding because we're a small piece of the pie and we can get projects started, and then we need additional funding from NIH to carry things forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Theresa, for taking time to present this to us. I know you this isn't, this is more than the hour we've spent together. It's the time preparing for it. So really appreciate it. Making it accessible to non-scientists is so incredibly important. So thank you for doing that. For all of you joining us, we've recorded this webinar. So if you want to go back, watch part of it, watch all of it, it will be available to you. We will be sharing it out tomorrow. Have a great day, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.